besties, and welcome to another Genshin theory! Today's topic is actually something I've touched on in the past, and I feel like it's finally time to give it its own dedicated video. Have you ever noticed the huge similarities between Liria and Sumeru? The countries border each other, so it makes sense for them to share similar topography, but the parallels between them are so much more than something literally surface level. In my last theory video, I talked about the similarities between the Scarlet King Dendro and Zhongli. Their backstories are nearly identical. I won't go into as much detail as I did last time, so if you want the full explanation, I'll link that video in the pinned comment. Dendro was one of Sumeru's 3 ruling gods, along with Greater Lord Rukkhadevata and the Goddess of Flowers. Although Rukkhadevata was the Archon, the 3 of them were very influential to Sumeru's culture. Dendro was in love with the Goddess of Flowers, but she died and caused him and Rukkhadevata's friendship to fall apart. They still liked each other, but they just went their separate ways, with Rukkhadevata taking the rainforest and Dendro taking the desert. After some time of being apart, Rukkhadevata became a smaller version of herself when she reunited with Dendro during his death.
In helping the Scarlet King to eradicate forbidden knowledge, she exhausted her strength, and her form became that of a small child.
This is almost identical to Zhongli's backstory. During the Archon War, Morax was one of 3 gods belonging to Guili Assembly, along with Marcosius and Guizhong. It's implied that Morax and Guizhong were in love, but just like Dendro and the Goddess of Flowers, Guizhong died. This caused Guili Assembly to fall apart, and Morax and Marcosius went off and did their own things for a bit. Eventually, Marcosius became a smaller version of himself, and we now know him as Guoba. During the Moonchase event story, we saw Zhongli and Guoba meet again after what I can only assume is a few millennia, with Marcosius as Guoba.
Oi! Guobaが逃げたぞ!
お前か。久しいな、友人よ。
I won't get into why Dendro died and Zhongli didn't, because I already did that last time. That doesn't matter for this video. The point is that this random background character from Sumeru has a nearly identical story to Liria's Archon. There are a few possible explanations for that I went over in the last theory video, and I think I've settled on my personal favorite. I think Dendro and Zhongli have the same constellation Lapis Dei. Keep that in mind because we're going to come back to why that is. Sumeru is a mix of real-world cultures, one of them being Iranian. Nilou's character is heavily based on Persian culture, which would be modern-day Iranian. Nilou is not the only character who pulls from Persia. Ajdaha's name comes from Persian folklore. In Iranian mythology, an Ajdaha is a fictional creature somewhat similar to a dragon, but they're a little bit more like snakes. In my obligatory humanities class I'm taking for my degree, we've been talking quite a bit about the Shahnameh, one of the most influential pieces of Persian literature. The Shahnameh chronicles over 100,000 lines of fictional Iranian kings and mythical characters, some of which are famous for defeating Ajdahas. One of these characters is Rostam, a name we also see in Genshin. In Genshin, Rostam was a knight of Favonius who was sent to defeat Durin, a dragon, during the Cataclysm. Although Durin is closer to a European dragon than a Persian Ajdaha, he absolutely was a similar mythological creature. Since Genshin is making so many references to Persian folklore, Ajdaha's name is not coincidental. It cannot be an accident or coincidence that his name comes from a real-world culture that shows up in Sumeru. The implication that Ajdaha is from Sumeru is kind of probably off-putting at first, but hear me out. Remember Ajdaha's backstory? Morax found him underground in the chasm. When Morax released Ajdaha, he created eyes for him. Ajdaha was blind. That's not a huge shock, considering most underground animals in real life have limited eyesight or are completely blind because they live in the dark. The chasm was considered by many players to be a preview of Sumeru. It was the last new area released before Sumeru, not to mention it's right next to it. The chasm introduced things we see in Sumeru now, like the floating fungi. In a hidden area of the chasm, there were 3 totems representative of the 3 nations preceding it: Animo for Mondstadt, Geo for Liyue, and Electro for Inazuma. Upon lighting all 3 totems, you were able to open a chest that gave you a quest item called the Shriveled Seed. The seed is similar in appearance and description to the Kusava, another quest item you receive in Sumeru. After you finish the quest involving the Kusava, it becomes withered, much like the Shriveled Seed. The chasm and Sumeru are undoubtedly connected, to no one's surprise considering how close the 2 areas are to each other. It's only natural that they would be similar. In Enkanomiya, we learned the history of early Teyvat. Long before the reign of the Archons following the 2,000-year-long world war that led to their rise to power, Teyvat had 7 other elemental leaders. Each one had their own country too. They were elemental dragons similar in appearance to bishops called the 7 Sovereigns. A god called the Primordial One entered Teyvat and defeated the Sovereigns over a 40-year period. It's not definitively stated whether or not the Sovereigns were killed, so I believe that the Sovereigns surrendered to the Primordial One and fled underground. Ajdaha is an elemental dragon who looks similar to Viships. He lived underground for a considerable amount of time. At the end of Zhongli's second story quest, he implies that Ajdaha is even older than he is. Zhongli was born towards the end of the war between the Primordial One and the Second Who Came, long after the Sovereigns were defeated by the Primordial One. I think Ajdaha was the Geo-Sovereign. That would explain why he was found underground, having gone blind after possibly millions of years of hiding there. But just because Ajdaha is likely the Geo-Sovereign doesn't mean he's from Liyue. In the context of Teyvat, Ajdaha's name comes from Sumeru, not Liyue. His name is Persian, not Chinese like all other Liyue characters are. That would imply that Ajdaha is from Sumeru originally. Although Ajdaha was discovered underground in Liyue, the area he was found in was very close to Sumeru. When Ajdaha went underground, he could have moved east from Sumeru to the chasm where he later emerged. If that's what happened, and it seems very likely to me, then Sumeru was the original nation of Geo, not Liyue. The similarities between Deshret and Morax may be explained by Sumeru and Liyue sharing the same element across time. Earlier I said that I think both of them have the same constellation of Lapis Dei, which literally translates to God of Stone. This is partly because they have such similar backstories, but there's more than just that. Below the mausoleum of King Deshret lies the desert's largest underground area. Although it's tedious to explore in my opinion, I think it gave me more proof of the presence of Geo and Sumeru. There's a particular part that looks nearly identical to the chasm minus the presence of other human beings. The cavern walls appear to be lined with amber, much like the mountains we see in Joyun Karst. There are a considerable amount of geofungi here. To me, they seem a lot more prevalent than fungi of other elemental variations. By now, we're all fully aware that the environmental storytelling in this game is no coincidence. This had to have been 100% on purpose. I think that because Sumeru used to be the nation of Geo when the Sovereigns were around, the likelihood for Deshret being born under the constellation of Lapis Dei was increased. Deshret had a lot of titles, including the Scarlet King, the Morning King, and the Lord of the Blazing Sun, but we never actually heard what he was the god of. Being the king of the desert and having a strong connection to Geo, I think he may have been the god of sand. Sand is literally just microscopic rocks, so that makes sense to me. As a minor god, Deshret didn't get to be the Geo Archon or anything special, but he had dominion over a tinier version. Deshret is exclusively referred to using the title of king, which we also see with Zhongli. When people are talking about him as a god, they almost always call him Rex Lapis, which translates to Stone King. Sharing the constellation of Lapis Dei, Deshret and Zhongli are both gods of Geo in different ways. With Ajdaha's background as the Geo Sovereign and Deshret as a minor Geo deity, I really do think that Sumeru was the original nation of Geo. I don't think Sumeru being the original Geo country has any huge implications for Genshin's main plot though. I just think it's something interesting to think about. I don't know if it'll ever even get brought up in the game, but I think it's pretty clear what the game is trying to tell us. There's too much in Ajdaha and Deshret's characters to ignore. Deshret and Zhongli being so similar makes me wonder if there's other gods out there with the same constellations as other archons. Like Ventes is Carmen Day, which means god of songs, so maybe there's another background god character who has a weird connection to music in the wind that we'll hear about in another country. That kind of stuff really doesn't change the plot of the game or anything, but I think background world building stuff like this is pretty cool. I actually think Inazuma used to be the original nation of Hydro, but that's another video for another day. Maybe when Fontaine comes out I'll have more stuff to back that up. Maybe all of the elements and countries got mixed up when the Sovereigns went underground and the Archon War happened. Who knows? I doubt they'll ever talk about it in the game. Best of luck to everyone on their Nahida and Yoimiya polls. They're both some of my favorite characters in the whole game, so I'm really excited to see them running together. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye, besties!